There is a lot of new stuff going on this week on this website. Do not miss the Lufkin animal story. The Elmendorf beast, you will recall, a few weeks ago, we published pictures of it. We have it under DNA testing in California. DNA tests are not yet completed. We still do not know what these animals are, but another one has been found in Lufkin, Texas, and we do know there is yet another on the loose in Lufkin, Texas. We have detailed pictures on the website. Go to unknowncountry.com. Go to Dreamland. You'll find in the part about the subscriber section a click-through to detailed pictures. You do not need to be a subscriber to see the pictures, but to listen to the interview with Stacy Womack, who actually examined this animal, a 20 years of experience in the veterinary area. It took a personal examination of this animal, and it is really a remarkable story. It is beginning to look as if somebody has created a genetic monster out there playing with genetic experimentation and released it into the wild. These animals are suffering. Their mouths do not work right. They cannot eat properly. They are severely malnourished. It is extremely strange, and even stranger is you'll hear Stacy Womack talking about when they shoot these animals, and this was true in Elmendorf and it's true in Lufkin, they do not bleed. They simply die. The animal in Lufkin, it's bizarre, extremely bizarre. The animal in Lufkin's skin just crumbled away as if it had been dead for weeks, even though it had been killed within an hour of her examining it. We are trying to get people to trap these animals instead of kill them, but, it's hard to communicate across so many different areas, and people tend to shoot first and think later, sadly enough, but hopefully that won't continue. Next week, by the way, on Dreamland, Zechariah Sitchin will be interviewed by William Henry. This is a rare occasion. Zechariah does not do many interviews anymore. He's got a new book out. You can get it right now from the unknowncountry.com store. Don't miss next week. Zechariah Sitchin interviewed by William Henry. Tonight, I'm going to be on Coast to Coast AM talking more about these animals with Art. That's going to be exciting. If you know what I wish you would do right now, I wish you would subscribe to unknowncountry.com. We need you. And think of it, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a new live chat in the subscriber section, so you can actually chat with these wonderful guests on Dreamland and on the subscriber section on Mysterious Powers. And this week also on Mysterious Powers, stunner of a show. Todd Michaels has taken the beautiful miracle of the loaves and fishes, and he has found in it a secret message about what miracles are and what Christ was really doing that is awesomely beautiful. Just amazing. Listen to Mysterious Powers this week as Anne talks to this extraordinary man in his interpretation of this beautiful miracle. It is really, really something. What we're coming up with now, Barbara Hand Clow will be with us in just a minute, talking about the thing that we have been working on in the past few weeks on Dreamland, which is the process of contact. And she is, after writing the Pleiadian Agenda, she's taken it a lot farther. And you know what? You know the enigmatic mystery of crop circles, they're so beautiful, but what are they? Barbara understands it. Yes, Barbara understands it, and you're going to understand it too when you listen to Barbara Hand Clow. This is Whitley Strieber. We'll be right back. Before we started with the program, Barbara said to me that she reminded me that we've had a kind of a parallel journey. But before I go into that, I just want to mention, and I'll mention this occasionally during the program, Barbara's website is handcloud2012.com. That's handcloud2012.com. And when you go there, be sure and click on the workshop schedule. She may be near you in the next few months. And if you want some of this energy and you do need it, go there and go to that workshop. That would be very, very valuable for all of us. I hope I can be at one of them if I'm close to where she is. Now, Barbara, let's go back. Before the show, as I was just saying, you started by saying to me that there was this parallel experience, and could you amplify that a little bit?
Yeah, and hi, Whitley. Good to talk to you.
Hi, good to talk to you.
I like all of your books, but one of the ones that I like the most is called The Secret School.
Yeah.
Is that right? Because I don't have a copy of it right now. I went running around for it, but I thought that was right. And because that's where you told your story of getting in touch with other dimensions, and it maybe extraterrestrials, maybe not, but that's where you really got in touch with some of the record banks that you're in touch with. And basically, you and I seem to be in touch with the same data banks. The other person who seems to be in touch with these data banks also is Barbara Marciniak. And she's been a close friend of mine for years, so that when we get information at the same time, we get to check with each other, you know. And there definitely is a download of the mastery schools coming to this planet at this time. It's an amazingly exciting time to be alive, probably the most exciting time probably since the time of Pythagoras in 500 BC and then earlier. And it's just amazing to be alive now and to share in this experience of all this knowledge coming back. And basically all I want to do, and I think you're in the same place, is just get people excited about this stuff, because once they get interested, then they become excited and curious, and their lives take on a new shine and a new joy and happiness. And that's why we come to the planet. That's what we should be doing here, you know? Well,
yeah, exactly. We are in a situation on this planet that not only it's something that we must be doing this.
Yes.
And yeah. I want to now. Do you want to continue to discuss my material, or would you like to go on and start talking about yours, which I am?
We can go on with mine if you want to, but I just wanted to point out that there are people, not a lot of people yet. Although when you get down with younger people, like people under 30, it's like they look at me as if they can't even believe that I don't understand that all of them have already figured all of this out, which is also kind of exciting. But people our age, like in our 60s, it's rather unusual to be in touch with these levels. And It's just been fun having you on the planet, having the bravery to publish, this material as well as myself.
Well, right, and of course, folks, you'd be surprised at how much bravery it actually takes. It's interesting, Barbara. The closer we get to 2012, the more I think of it as the wailing of the cicadas in the late summer, as they get close to the time of their passing. Mm-hmm. The more strident the voices become, saying, no, no, no. I was interested that, when I started doing this back in the 80s, I rarely would get threatening email or threatening letters in those days. Mm-hmm. Then email came along, and the number of threats increased. But now, if we dare to mention anything that seems to go against President Bush or fundamentalist Christianity, we get death threats. And
you should come to one of my workshops in the sense that we're at my workshops. We've been totally open all the way through this period. And we actually and we've been teaching this particular material for 8 years now, and that's Jerry and me together. And we actually had a lot more difficulty with people getting angry 7 or 8 years ago than we do now.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah,
because
at the same time, what I was going to say is our population right now is split almost 50-50 between Christian fundamentalists or evangelicals and then basically new consciousness seekers. You can call it New Age if you want to. Right. But it is amazing in this country how we are just split right down the middle. And that's why it's so difficult right now, because one side seems to be in a battle with the other side. And yet, in fact, we both have relatively similar points of view. It's kind of like if you get a Baptist and say Unitarian, not a Unitarian, but more like an Episcopal theologian together, they'll fight harder than if you get a Jewish theologian and a Catholic theologian. In other words, the closer we get to being in the same fields of interest, often the more that people will fight. you know.
Yeah.
And so I think that anger, that rising anger and the negativity that's coming in is coming from pretty much from the Christian right. And over the years, I've had a very good relationship with them. And I don't mean what they say about me, because they don't like me at all. But what I've been able to do over the years is say, hey, wait a minute, I feel like I understand you. And they say, you feel like you understand me? And I say, yeah. You got interested in biblical history, and you got interested in Egypt, and you got interested in all these ancient stories about the world and about God. And meantime, you live in a culture where everything's boring and nobody talks about anything interesting.
Yeah.
And so you're interested in Christianity and Jewish history and all that stuff because it tells you something about your life, and it gives you a story that you can go on. And I just say to them, I respect that. And I expect to be respected for my story too, you know.
I want to just mention that one of the reasons I brought this up was that there is a way of getting past this split. There's always a squaring of the circle is always possible. Whenever it seems impossible is when it is possible.
Yeah.
And Anne has her own show now called Mysterious Powers, which is, and in the Mysterious Powers that's playing right now on Dreamland, on our website, she has an interview with a man called, a doctor called Todd Michael, who has written a book called The 12 Conditions of a Miracle, where he analyzes the story of the loaves and fishes and shows how it is actually a story of somebody who understood how to manipulate matter using, who was coming at it from a quantum physical viewpoint, and he proceeds to tell how to make your life a life in which you can make very real miracles also, and it's really about vibration. And
isn't that exciting, you know?
It's extremely exciting, and he's working, he's really has gotten a new key to the Gospels that fits the larger paradigm that we are all working on, and therefore squares that circle.
Yeah, isn't that wonderful?
Isn't that something?
That's wonderful, and as you know from my book, the key to everything, of course, is vibrations.
Exactly.
Because as you know, what happened for me, Whitley, was in 1994. I've been a publisher, and not anymore, but I was a publisher and a writer and a mother of 4 children, and all of a sudden this incredible vision came to me, which ended up being the Pleiadian Agenda, and the material was so powerful and so overwhelming that I had.
Let's talk about the moment of the vision again.
Yeah.
I just want everyone to hear, because the energy that comes out of you when you describe what it was like when that happened will come flying right through the radio and into your heart.
Well, first of all, for me, it was actually pretty horrific because, as you know from your own life, when these higher frequencies and energies come in, it's very, very challenging. It challenges everything you've ever known about anything, you know. But what happened to me one day is I was just sitting around my house, and all of a sudden there was a spinning ball of light in front of me, and what it looked like is it had a bunch of triangles in it. It was like a ball of triangles, and then there were like rays of light were shooting out of the points where the triangles intersect, and then these rays of light were just going out into infinity. And it was there for about, I don't have any sense of time, but judging by what was going on that day, it must have been at least 20 minutes or half an hour. And I was just utterly entranced, and I also could hear sound in it, and I could feel vibrations in it and everything, and it almost felt like it was alive. And then it went away. And so the question was, what do I do with that? You know what I mean? And so what I did is I allowed myself to do a series of 20 or 30 channel sessions where people would ask me questions. In other words, I went into an altered state, like just a light trance, and then people would ask me questions. And the people who were in those classes were people who knew a lot about science and a lot about geometry and a lot about astronomy, because I could tell that this vision involved very, very complex science, which I did not understand at the time. It turns out that sphere was actually a tetrahedron. I now know it was a tetrahedron. But if you'd asked me what a tetrahedron was back in those days, I would have had no idea what you were talking about. And so what happened for me, Whitley, was once I got the channeling sessions done and I made it into a book called the Pleiadian Agenda, then, like I always do it, at that point that was my 5th or 6th book. And whenever I write a book, then I go out and teach it because people always want me to come out and teach. So I went out teaching a book, and I only understood 50% of what was in that book, and it was really, really bizarre. And I learned by teaching and from feedback from the people who came to the classes. That's how I figured out the meaning of the book. And then I also spent 8 years studying sacred geometry and physics and string theory and all the more advanced sciences in order to actually write this book called Alchemy. And
why do you call it alchemy? I just want to know the answer to that question, but before we get into that, we've got to take a little break. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back. We're talking to Barbara Hand Clow about her extraordinary book, Alchemy of 9 Dimensions, Decoding the Vertical Axis Crop Circles in the Mayan Calendar. You're going to learn more about 2012 in this perhaps than you have ever learned before, and we'll get to that during the course of the interview. But right now, we were just starting to talk about alchemy. Why the alchemy of 9 dimensions?
Okay, well, alchemy to me means the transformation of myself or the transformation of some other entity. And alchemy in traditional practice has involved working with chemicals even and working with various devices to access higher consciousness such as sacred geometry. And alchemy really means going through an alchemy is going through a process of transformation which takes you to a higher state of consciousness. But the real reason I use that word, Whitley, is because I think it's a word that in a sense has been stolen and taken away from us in our culture. And the reason it kind of has been stolen is it was mainly taken over by males. Alchemy has almost been exclusively a male form of study. And in the traditional male alchemical studies, one of the things that always goes on is sort of trying to keep everything secret. There's always this pathway through all this stuff in alchemy books, and you end up never getting anywhere. And when you finish the book, you've kind of gone through a process that taught you something, and yet you don't really learn anything. And what the Pleiadians tell me is that I'm teaching goddess alchemy. And what they say female alchemy is the total revelation of all of the secrets in the universe. So the goal here is to really give the secrets of the transformative process.
Wow. It's nothing less than that. And yet, when she says that, it seems, well, this couldn't be possible. It's too big for us. Here's some extraordinary and very good news. It isn't anymore. Everything is changing. You will understand this, and you will be able to take it into yourself and use it. Maybe 20 years ago, nobody could. Maybe 10 years ago, somebody could. But now, you can, and I can. We all can. Now, let's go on.
And we must.
What?
And we must, you know.
And we must, yes, because there is a process taking place here. There is indeed a sort of judgment, and I hate to even use that word, taking place, but it's more a time of choice. And there are those of us who are making the choice to use our God's gift, our minds, to reconnect. Now, last week, I believe, in the subscriber section on Dreamland, and that we ran it also for a while in the regular Dreamland program. It may still be up there for all I know. There was an interview with Dr. Roger Lear about something that had happened in Brazil, and it sounds fantastic, but it's a totally credible story about a doctor who ended up treating an alien in a hospital in Brazil. And this alien had a message as he healed himself before the eyes of the doctor. His message was this: we are no different from them. We are no less in any way. except, and this gets back to Barbara's book and back to this crucial conversation we're having, we have lost touch with our spirits. And, of course, this is a central theme in Barbara's book. And, Barbara, I want you to tell us what exactly we are out of touch with. And this book is about how to answer the question raised by that visitor, which is, how do we get back in touch? Here's how.
Right. And the reason I'm so excited about it is because, as you know, it's called Alchemy of 9 Dimensions. And by dividing the, and of course I didn't divide it, but by seeing the dimensions on 9 different levels, we begin to approach the possibility of getting in touch with something like an alien, first of all, being present for us physically in our realm, and then secondly, being able to heal him or herself right in front of a medical team. Now, this, of course, is on the level of Christ. As you know, we're approaching the kinds of levels of transformation, transfiguration of Christ. And I got into a lot of trouble when I was in graduate school. I have a master's in theology, and when it came time to write a paper for New Testament studies, I wrote a paper about my transfiguration. And the nun scholar who was in charge of that class called me in and said, I'm giving you an A- on this paper because even though this paper is fantastic, it's not right for you to talk about your own transfiguration because nobody but Christ transfigures. And I just looked at her and I said, that's not true, and I hope someday you'll experience the same thing yourself. And we're all capable of that. And when a being can come into our realm and make a demonstration like that, boy, everybody who was on that medical team is never going to forget about that. You know?
Never. No.
They will be forever changed by seeing something like that. And I've actually, in my lifetime, healed myself from 4 serious illnesses. And in all 4 cases, I would go for a diagnosis, because you have to find out what it was, and then I went to work on it myself. When I went back to the doctor, totally healed of what I had, and asked the doctor if they wanted to know how I did it, all 4 of them said no. So there's a tremendous level of denial about this level of possibility. But unfortunately for the people who are in denial, this is just breaking through all over the place. And it's really going to explode now, Whitley. You know how I know it's going to explode now? Did you hear about that movie called What the Bleep Do I Know? Did you hear about that? Have you heard about that yet? A new movie has come out that has to do with a lot of the things that we're talking about today. That movie was released the very same day that Alchemy was released from the publisher. And so we're on the edge of another one of those wonderful periods where everything is going to explode into a positive realm. And given the national news and given the pain that the people in Haiti are experiencing and everywhere else in the world, we need this now.
Oh, absolutely.
We need miracles.
Tell us more about this movie. I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, let's see if I can get it back into my consciousness, because it's a visual thing for me. I don't know if I can bring it back in. Just remember that. What the bleep, it's something, What the Bleep Do I Know?
Oh, and yes, I do know.
Have you heard about that?
And
it's a movie about
a lot of people on the website have recommended it.
Yeah, it's a movie about quantum mechanics and string theory. And if you read Jacob Adabit, which was a book that came out in the 70s of a man who transfigured in San Francisco, this book actually shows the female lead going through transfiguration experiences, and then it does a wonderful job showing what it does to her personal life as she goes through that process. Because, as you know from experience, anyone who does go to these levels of consciousness, the early stages of it are very, very difficult, just like birthing. It's very difficult to go through this process, and yet when you're on the other side of it, you're just such a happy, joyful person that it's worth going there.
Well, I have been through that. I woke up in the middle of that darkness one night, and that's what started my whole journey.
Yeah, I know.
And that was about the scariest thing that ever happened to me, and I still wear scars from it. On the one hand, on the other hand, it was also, without question, the best thing that ever happened.
Well, you know what I loved about your writing at that time was that you do such a good job of describing the fear that comes along with experiences like this, and yet you always show yourself going through the fear and getting to the other side. And we have to realize, that we can do that when we're in a situation where we're confronted with something fearful. We can get to the other side.
We can indeed.
Yeah, and the other side is the light. Yeah. Yeah.
And this is what. Now, I want to stay just with this for just a couple of more minutes. We're kind of exploring a little bit of the dark side of this, and deep in your book, you mentioned more or less in passing the Doug and Dave phenomenon with regard to crop circles. Now, we're going to get into the more important stuff later, but we have to deal with this, and I want to kind of put it aside. That is to say, the effort that is made not only in the case of crop circles, but in the case of everything and everybody connected with this movement to a higher vibrational level, to stop it, to prevent it, to hold it back, to do anything, to lie about it in order to keep people turned away. And they're very effective. The people, like just this summer in England, the media was full of crop circle debunking stories, and it does keep people away from opening. Now, why is that there, Barbara?
Well, I shouldn't say if we succeed. I should say when we succeed at bringing this planet into a state of enlightenment and higher awareness. When we get there, all of the people who are holding that negative mindset, they won't exist. Now, I don't mean they're going to die. I'm not talking about that. But what I mean is their mindset won't exist anymore. Now, if you think about it, their mindset, just like your mindset or mindset, is what keeps their consciousness, and it's what keeps them alive. And, you have to ask yourself, if you know anything about new physics, it's impossible to explain why it is that we get up every morning, look in the mirror, and we still look the same, if you know what I mean. Our consciousness and our thoughts about ourselves is literally what causes us to manifest on this planet. And so this movement threatens, from their own belief perspective, it totally threatens their existence. And that's why they will do anything to stop us. But they can't stop us. We're getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
No, they can't stop us, and we will get bigger and bigger. But I just don't understand what the motivation is.
It isn't about a motivation, a positive motivation. It's about fear, and it's about being threatened by literally disappearing. Their world, Whitley, is going to disappear. And the reason it's going to disappear is because if we go on the way we are on this planet is going to be destroyed. And you and I both know that. And therefore, that point of view has to transform to the next level. But as they stay in their mindset and in their consciousness, then when they see somebody challenging that, their very survival is threatened by that. And see, I see that all the time as a teacher. And it's really amazing how I can say things to people and they'll allow me to talk. Because when I speak to people, I'm coming from love. And everything comes from love. And I have so much compassion for someone who's caught in this mindset.
Yeah,
because
me too.
I had to go through this process, and I had to change myself, and I know how difficult it was, and I remember what I was like before I changed, and therefore with any person who's caught at a certain level, I can feel what they're going to have to go through, and I have a lot of love and compassion for them.
Well, listen up, folks, because we're going to get into the details of the vertical of all kinds of stuff in just a couple of minutes. But first, we're going to have a few messages. And these messages on this website, on this radio program, are important. They're not like ordinary ads, so please listen carefully. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It is Dreamland, and we're back with Barbara Hand Clow, Alchemy of the Nine Dimensions. Now, this relates, this book, very much to the crop circle phenomenon. Crop circles are important. They are real. They are very important because they are an educational and teaching tool. Barbara understands well what they are and what they mean, and has had relationship with them to the point that some crop circles have reflected Barbara's own work and ideas in an affirmation of what she was doing. In fact, Barbara, tell us about that one incident where you actually drew the circle before it appeared in the fields.
Yeah, that's a good one. And that was a wake-up call for me. Whenever I write a book, I always, and I've written like 10, I always make a sculpture or make a drawing that's sort of fairly small, because since I have to work and all that kind of stuff and my life is complicated, I only get to sit down at the typewriter like 4 days a week, 3 hours at a stint. That's about it. And so what I do is whatever I have created for that book, that sculpture or that image, whenever I'm ready to write more of that book, I just put that image in front of myself and I encode it in my brain, and then I just go to work, and it keeps me from wasting time. So I published a book in 1991 called Signet of Atlantis. And when it was time to write Signet of Atlantis, I had a publisher's deadline as usual to get it in. I was trying to find a symbol or trying to do a sculpture. And so I sat down in my study in Santa Fe, and I got a piece of paper out and a pen and just tranced out and drew an image. And I tuned into the image, and I could tell that it was the image for the book. So I had my image, so I could start to work the next day. And so that evening, I had a German publisher who was busy translating a bunch of my books, and his name is Lutz Croft of Zweitausendines. And Lutz faxed an image of the Barbary Castle crop circle, which happened like July 15th, 1991, and it was an astonishing crop circle. And he faxed an image of it to me because he knew I was curious about crop circles. And the image he faxed to me of a crop circle that had occurred in the fields in England about 6 hours after I drew the image. It was the same thing that I had drawn in my studio in Santa Fe, and it's a very complicated image.
Exactly. And how did you feel when you saw that?
It was interesting. I felt that wonderful, warm, blissful feeling you feel when you get a confirmation of other possibilities, you know. And besides the fact that I picked up on the same image, isn't it interesting that the publisher in Germany would be impulsed to fax me the image? That's interesting in itself in terms of synchronicity, you know.
Well, that happens to me all the time in my experience.
Yeah, it happens to me all the time, but I'll tell you, whenever it happens...
There's somebody working the levers, Barbara.
Yeah. But you know what I do whenever anything like that happens? I always stop and I say to God or whoever we're speaking to, I always just say, thank you for showing me that the way I'm creating has some larger reality than just myself. Because, you know, I get pretty bored with myself, you know. I'm much more interested in all these levels that are operating around me. And when something like that comes through, it's miraculous. And that single incident in 1991 is the creator of the Pleiadian Agenda and the creator of Alchemy of 9 Dimensions, for sure. And so you could say that the folks out there listening to the radio, if you just pay attention to these things, you may create a whole career and a whole life just out of taking advantage of these wonderful synchronicities. You know, because it told me I'm in touch with whoever is making those crop circles. And then I had to go to England. Of course, I've been to many crop circles conferences. I was just in England again this summer.
Have you ever been inside a crop circle?
Pardon?
Have you been inside a crop circle?
Oh, yeah, of course.
What's it like for you?
Well, it depends. First of all, there are some of the crop circles are not authentic, and that's a whole complicated subject in itself as far as how those are happening. And in some of the ones that were not real, and you can really tell the difference, anybody can tell the difference, it didn't feel very good frequently. And in the real ones, I go into such an altered state that I can hardly handle it. And it changes me a great deal, too. I have to go through more transformation as a result of being in one. But that has to be one that has come down, that has arrived in the last 3 or 4 days, maybe a week at the most. As soon as they're about a week old, I don't feel as much energy in them.
That's interesting. So the energy, it will fade after a while. But that's, in a way, that's not really the point of the crop circles. If it was something that we all had to feel, it would be coming to us in a different way. It seems to me that the key thing here is it's something we have to see. And in order to understand that, and as you go through this book, Alchemy of the 9 Dimensions, you are going to find out things about crop circles that are quite frankly awesome, and about yourself and your relationship to this. Because I'm telling you right now, you don't think you can do it. You can do it. You can be empowered in this level. Let's start by talking a little bit about the vertical axis, which is, of course, the key to the whole process. Barbara, what is it?
What is the vertical axis?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, there's my system, which is what the book's about. And the vertical axis is a generation of consciousness that goes from the iron core crystal in the center of the Earth all the way into the center of the Milky Way galaxy. So the vertical axis, and this is Earth's vertical axis, generates all the manifestations of consciousness and matter within our realm called Earth. Now, these vertical axes also exist all over the universe, but what Alchemy of Nine Dimensions is concerned with is the vertical axis that we live with on the planet Earth. And so the 10th dimension, or the vertical axis, generates the activity and manifestation of the other 9 dimensions. And I think I should give listeners a little bit of a sense of, like, what is a dimension.
Yes.
Well, according to alchemy, the first dimension is the iron core crystal in the center of the Earth. And then the second dimension is all the energy between the center of the Earth and the surface. So the second dimension is the realm where we have the magma and the volcanoes and all the microbes and everything. The third dimension is the surface of the Earth, where we exist in linear space and time. And then as we get into the fourth dimension, we start to enter into the world of the collective mind and the world where our feelings and thoughts all coalesce into an actual dimension. And that's a fascinating dimension.
Now,
and then
go ahead, please.
Yeah, if you want me to.
I'm sorry, I can't interrupt you at this moment. It's the wrong moment. I'll wait.
Oh, it's okay. And then the fifth dimension is the dimension of love and attraction, which actually generates the archetypal mind and the dimension that we live in here. And then we go further up, and each one of the dimensions has a different quality to it. So that's just a basic sense of what dimensions are. And the Pleiadians are saying that those 9 dimensions are generated by the vertical axis, which is a force going from the center of the Earth to the center of the Milky Way galaxy.
Now, here is a question that is beautifully addressed in your book that I really want you to talk about. Why is the Earth so important in this whole picture? What makes it so special?
Great, Whitley. Well, first of all, it's one of my favorite things because I'm part Native American and I love the Earth, you know.
Right.
And the Earth is special, first of all, because it's where we live. And one of the things that was always funny to me is when people used to think that in order to get higher consciousness, they had to get out of their body, when in fact we live in our bodies and our bodies exist on the Earth. And the access to all of these other dimensions that I'm talking about are in this dimension, the third dimension, which is the surface of the Earth. Now, of course, the Earth is all of these dimensions. But the reason the Earth is just so important to us is this is where we live. And people keep staying out of the Earth, you know, like, for example, the fourth dimension is the collective mind. And so if you watch television all the time, then basically what happens to you is your consciousness is stuck in the fourth dimension, in the archetypal collective mind. You don't really live on the Earth. And there's lots of people walking around whose heads are in a television tube, and they don't really exist on this planet. And it's a very critical issue at this time because if we're going to do the things we need to do with Earth, we need to be grounded right here in our dimension.
There is a force here that seeks to destroy the Earth before we have understood its importance. This is all around us. It is huge. It is everywhere. It is far bigger, it seems, than all of our efforts. Barbara, where do we stand?
Are you talking about evil, Whitley?
Well, I didn't want to quite put it that way, but
I want to make sure.
I'm
know.
I'm talking about entropy.
entropy.
I'm talking about
entropy. It doesn't have to be evil. If you want to say entropy.
Well, let me tell you what I'm talking about more specifically. Okay. I'm talking about the choice to buy, say, an SUV now, instead of a more economical car, knowing the consequences as we do. Yeah. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay. That's just pure ignorance. Because if anybody really understood what was going on, they wouldn't do it. And as you know, the fourth dimensional collective mind again is invested in people becoming obedient consumers, so they'll spend money the way a group of, as you know, this book uses the concept of the global elite, and it gets into the idea that there is a group of people who are controlling this planet at this time, and the only way that they do control the planet, and the only way they're going to continue to control the planet, is if we keep on giving up our power. You know, if you go out and buy a Mini Cooper instead of an SUV, you're using your power. And it's ignorance. People think they're getting power by consuming the planet when in fact they're not.
Exactly. We're not. In fact, by consuming the planet, we're losing power, and that is why why the illusion that we are gaining power by doing it is so powerful, so strong. Actually, when we lose the planet, we've lost everything. Yeah. We've lost everything.
And so as you know, I went to a lot of pains in this book, especially regarding the fourth dimension, to explain in great detail how the global elite uses programs to control us. I think that this is the central thing that people need to master now, is they need to start understanding how these programs are run on us, because when you start to understand how these programs operate, you become a very, very different human being.
Very different. And this book, folks, is going to really wake you up, because when she gets into this, you're going to start going, oh, wow, yes, I see it, yes. It's quite amazing. It really. I also think you can hear by my voice that it fired me up a lot.
But I also think it's going to make people mad, in the sense that when I go after some of the powers that are controlling us, we're all involved in that process together, because until we take our personal power back, we are actually empowering those forces. And that's when a person gets to the point where they understand that by buying an SUV, that they are empowering the American government to keep on going to bed with the Saudis, then you start to wise up and you don't do that. And not only that, you walk a lot too. Jerry and I have one little Mini Cooper, and we walk all the time.
In Dreamland, in Mysterious Powers, right now, Todd Michael is talking about that. He talks about the importance of walking. Annie and I walk every day because of what it does to the body. It is, and folks, Barbara, we passed over something very briefly a couple of minutes ago about the importance of being in the body in order to work on consciousness. You can't do it anywhere else. We got to take a little break. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back with Barbara Hand Clow. We're talking about what we're talking about is so extraordinary. First, it's a book, Alchemy of 9 Dimensions, a book that is eye-opening, that is essential reading. It's essential reading for those of us who are preparing for 2012. Barbara, tell us now a little bit about 2012. What will happen then?
Oh, well, that's the most fascinating question, isn't it? 2012 is, of course, the end of the Mayan calendar, and there's some controversy over whether it's 2011 or 2012, so I always like to put that in there, because we're all working, those of us who are Mayan calendar experts are working on dates all the time. But the point about the Mayan calendar that is important is that we have known for at least a couple of hundred years that this calendar existed that was invented by the Mayan civilization, and this calendar goes back millions and millions and even billions of years. And so it's been understood for quite a while that somehow the Mayans had a calendar for all the stages of evolution and all of the major changes that have happened on this planet, which of course have only been understood by science basically in the last 100 years. And so what has happened in the last 20 or 30 years is the realization that this calendar actually does describe something real. So as we get closer to the end of it, which for me, when I first got in touch with this issue, was the 1980s, as we've gotten closer in touch with the end of the Mayan calendar, there are a group of people, including myself, who have been following month by month, year by year, to see whether the kind of changes that the Mayans have forecast are actually happening. And so for me, what I did is I went through a whole process of watching, day by day, month by month. Is this real? Is anything happening here? And of course, the book gives a lot of data about that process. But I finally came to the conclusion by, I'd say, the early 1990s that this calendar is real. It says something important, and I've been working on it ever since then to attempt to understand exactly what it means. And I think that Alchemy of Nine Dimensions gives a very good definition for what it means, which would be that all of us are going to attain the levels of consciousness described in alchemy, the 9 dimensions of consciousness, by the time we come to 2012. Now, this is a progressive development. Like, you came to that point in the 80s, and I came to that point in the 90s, and different people are coming to this level all over the place. But one of the most important things about the Mayan calendar and about Alchemy of Nine Dimensions is that the basic understanding behind it is that this is about all of us making it together. This is not about Whitley getting higher conscious and this, and then turning around and saying to his neighbor, "Sorry, sucker, you didn't get there." This is about everybody getting to this point. And this is why I have such love and compassion and feeling for people who are resisting, such as evangelicals and fundamentalist Christians. Because when they finally let go, and of course, within their religious understanding of being born again and all that, in many ways they achieve these states of consciousness themselves. It's just that they also have not let go of judgment about other people.
And exactly, judgment is replaced by compassion.
Yeah.
And compassion, interestingly enough, when I meet somebody who's in judgment, they always reject that idea because they say, I'm not going to be soft on crime, etc., and so forth. The truth of the matter is that compassion is not a soft state. Compassion is a state of truthfulness. And it is hard. It is a very challenging thing to be truly compassionate to someone, because it means that you have had the courage and the insight to genuinely understand what they need the most, whatever it is. Yeah.
And it's a state of being hyper alert, too. Like, right. I am profoundly shocked right now by living in a country that is using all of its resources to bomb people in Iraq, and when the amount of money going to the Haitians is basically pennies. I can't believe it, that a country is suffering right now. That they're suffering the way they are, and that we know that much about what's going on down there. And, basically, South American countries are the ones who are helping them. It's just profoundly shocking to me. And it also should be profoundly shocking, especially to American blacks. And it probably is, except they have no voice, so who knows if they're shocked.
Right. No, nobody's interested in their voice. They don't, certainly when they speak out, they're not heard in the general media at all. It's like they don't exist.
Yeah.
Well, Barbara, let's go on now, because let's, in talking about the Pleiadian dimensions, the Alchemy of the Nine Dimensions, one of the things that you get into is the relationship between actual structures of crop circles and the models, like the 9-dimensional model that you have in of the Barbary Castle tetrahedron, which is quite a remarkable crop circle. Now, can you explain a little bit about what this is? And of course, it's important in relation to your your drawing as well, and who you think made it, and what we can learn from it. I'm just choosing one on purpose, because there are many examples of this in the book.
Right, and this is a very, very complex subject. But the Barbary Castle is tetrahedral geometry, and that's the basis of it. And the reason this is important is that tetrahedral geometry was the basis of the most profound teachings in the Pythagorean school. Now, the Pythagorean school was a school of wisdom that started around 500 BC, and it lasted for like 900 years. And the reason the Pythagorean mystery schools are so important to us now is that Pythagoras was actually a person who went to all of the mystery schools that existed during his time in 500 BC. Like, he went to Greece, he went to the Heliopolitan mystery schools in Egypt, he went and studied with the Druids, he went and studied with Zoroastrians. And so he went around the world and gathered all the keys of the mystery schools, because he felt that if it wasn't done at that time, that all of that knowledge would be lost. And as it turns out, he was right, because a lot of it was. But one of the things that we know about the Pythagorean mystery school is it's profoundly based on tetrahedral geometry and on some other concepts that have to do with tetrahedral geometry. So you'd have to say to yourself, well, who cares and what's the point? The point is that the Pythagorean mystery schools taught for 900 years that if people want to accelerate their consciousness and if they want to develop the higher and finer principles of the human, that they must study sacred geometry. And so the reason that Barbary Castle tetrahedral crop circle, way back as far as 1991, came in, was it was a signal that we must start learning the mysteries and tetrahedral geometry. And then someone listening on the air might say, well, that's never going to happen. Well, I want to tell you, Whitley, when I go out and teach, every year that I teach, there are more people who understand sacred geometry and are excited and thrilled by it. So it's actually happening out there, particularly with younger people.
Bear in mind, folks, and this is very important, critical for you, because a lot of you are tuning out the idea that you could ever understand sacred geometry. It ain't like high school geometry. It's different. You don't understand this in the same way. It is not like that. You understand this with your whole body. It is a means of understanding and bringing into your mind the perception and the experience of your vibrational potential. This is what it really is. You do not need to be a scientist to do this.
Yeah, that's right.
No,
that's right. And
I
like the way you said.
Heart.
Yeah, and I like the way you said whole body, Whitley.
Yes.
Because one of the things that I think will just help anybody understand sacred geometry immediately would be that according to alchemy, the sixth dimension, which is the dimension of sacred geometry, is where all the forms exist that cause things to replicate down here. Like the idea of cow is in the sixth dimension, and then things replicate in the third dimension. And from the point of view of being a human, the form of our personal geometry exists in the sixth dimension. And whenever we do yoga or Tai Chi or sacred dance, what happens is we start to move our body in relationship to the sacred geometry. And you know what happens to you when you do that? You don't get arthritis, your knee joints don't go, and you can live in an extremely healthy, vital body for a long, long time before you get really old. So there's real simple good reasons for mastering these concepts, just your basic health.
Well, folks, if you can believe it, and it's hard for me to believe, we have actually come to the end of our time together with Barbara Hand Clow. It's the energy was tremendous for me. I feel almost like I'm levitating, body and soul, right now, Barbara. Alchemy.
Well, thanks, Whitley. Thanks a lot, and I'm going to come teach in Austin next year at Omega, so maybe I'll be able to connect with you again.
If we're in Texas, I would just love that.
Barbara, you're not. Where are you now?
I'm in Los Angeles at the moment, but we travel a lot, so I could be anywhere. Okay. I don't know where I'll be next year.
Okay, I thought you were living in Texas.
Well, we're based there, sort of, but we're not there very often, actually.
Okay.
Alchemy of the Nine Dimensions, Barbara Hand Clow. This is your chance, folks, to get started. This is something very, very real here. You can begin to connect now with crop circles and with the vertical axis within you. It ain't rocket science. It's a lot higher than that. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. Next up, Linda Moulton Howe. We'll be right back. One reporter who loves mysteries is radio's leading science journalist, Linda Moulton Howe. She's an Emmy Award-winning TV producer, documentary filmmaker, and writer, and the reporter and editor for EarthFiles.com, the Internet's most respected edge science website. Today, she has a sobering report for us on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the possibility that it may be helping terrorism inadvertently. Here she is from Philadelphia, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley, and that is right. That is the question. This week, the State Department offered a $5 million reward for the Al-Qaeda leader who last year allegedly posed as a student at the Master University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, in an effort to steal radioactive materials from that university's 5-megawatt nuclear research reactor. The terrorist goal? To cause another 9/11 by constructing and blowing up a dirty radioactive bomb in the United States. American authorities also think that Al-Qaeda leader directed the surveillance efforts of the financial districts in New York City, Washington, D.C., and Newark, New Jersey this summer that provoked Homeland Security to increase terror alerts for those cities to code orange, and those alerts still remain by Homeland Security for those cities. On October 4th in London, British police arrested 3 men under the British Terrorism Act for allegedly trying to obtain radioactive material to make a dirty bomb there. According to the News of the World newspaper, the men were in a gang trying to buy a kilogram of what is called red mercury, a radioactive substance made in the old Soviet Union to create handheld dirty bombs. Time magazine also reports this week that an Islamic terrorist cell tried to build a dirty bomb in England before interruption by intelligence authorities in August this year. The radioactive sources for this dirty bomb effort were the americium-241 substances taken out of several dozen household smoke alarms. On Sunday, October 3rd, the Patriot News in Harrisburg headlined, quote, "Finding dirty bomb materials is a mouse click away," unquote. The story was based on an interview with Scott Portzline. He's a security consultant with 3 Mile Island Alert in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Reporter Gary Linton wrote, quote, "The Nuclear Regulatory Commission tracks radioactive materials at more than 21,000 sites through routine applications for license renewals that those sites must file with the government NRC. Documents for one well-known Northeastern university included a floor plan of the building showing the office and the vault where the radioactive materials are kept," unquote. I talked with Scott Portzline about the strange post-9/11 irony that the American Nuclear Regulatory Commission would publicly expose locations of radioactive materials where terrorists could access them. Scott also emphasized how many missing and stolen radioactive materials there are in the United States. In fact, the Washington Post reported in 2002 that almost 1,495 radioactive sources have been lost and stolen between 1996 and 2001, and more than half, 56% of those, remain missing, the NRC has admitted. Scott Portzline helped the volunteer civilian 3 Mile Island Alert Group in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, monitor radiation and security near that nuclear power plant. He has testified before the U.S. Senate, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Advisory Committee on Reactor Safeguards, and other governmental bodies in an effort to close security gaps that he has found. His research has been cited by the U.S. Department of Energy and various military branches. Scott worries that dirty bombs and attacks on nuclear power plants are high on the Al-Qaeda terrorist list of how to attack the U.S. again.
Biggest concern right now is how easy it is for anyone and me to use my computer to discover the floor plans of where weapons-grade uranium and plutonium are stored, and also other materials that could be very harmful as dirty bombs, and the availability of weapons-grade materials that can be found using the NRC's database.
Now, can you give an example of where something has been put on the Internet that would have made us vulnerable?
Well, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has a document retrieval system from their website. And what one can do is, using their program that's downloadable for free in less than a minute, can actually connect right into their document retrieval computers. And from there one can search the records to find universities, hospitals, any licensee, any industry, any entity that owns radioactive materials. And in many of these reports is given the floor plan down to the address of the building, what floor the material is stored on, what room, what cabinet, what vault, what drawer in some cases.
And why would there be such detail put on the Nuclear Regulatory Commission website?
Well, this is a mistake. Post 911, the NRC does not want this type of material to be made public. Part of it, there's a twofold problem here. One is the licensees themselves, including in their applications or their relicensing applications, are giving drawings that the NRC doesn't necessarily need, and they certainly aren't purging from the file before they attach it to their document retrieval system. Now, if the NRC had enough money and enough resources, they could scour these documents, which would literally be 10,000 of pages each day, to get rid of these drawings. So part of the problem is the sheer number of pieces of paper showing the floor plans, and the other problem is that the licensees are providing too much information in some cases. It's a serious problem, and the NRC agrees with me. They're slow to act. They don't even have the capability right now to handle the matter properly. So activists have been the ones who talk to the NRC and say, hey, this document needs to have this page or these pages removed because I don't think you want people to know this. And not all of the time has the NRC agreed.
Part of the challenge for the terrorists would be that they would have to go to multiple sites of theft to get enough to make a dirty bomb. But what you're saying is that the Internet itself should be a Nuclear Regulatory Commission with all of these details from post 9/11 would at least make such an effort easier.
No question about that. But I don't agree entirely. There are certain sources of radioactivity that one single theft of one source could devastate a city. And one example would be a document I just saw for the first time as it was posted last week, where a source of strontium 90 with 125,000 curies of radiation, if that were ground up and dispersed as a radioactive dispersal device, is what the government calls it, and we know it as a dirty bomb, that could devastate a city with the contamination and cause some harm to people. Definitely, especially if they inhale the material, they could end up with cancer.
Scott, what was this source?
It didn't say what the source was going to be used for, and I believe this was actually in raw form. This is a company that handles radioactive materials and probably uses them to sell to other industries who manufacture gauges or these medical devices and things like this. But I'll give an example of what that type of source can be used for. To power a lighthouse. The Soviet Union has a problem where people are breaking into lighthouses to steal any type of wire and metal, anything they can get for scrap. And in some cases, they've killed themselves handling the strontium-90. And in fact, there was a story in the news a few years ago where some lumberjacks in Soviet Georgia were exposed to strontium-90. And I have the video and seen the video of the recovery of the strontium-90 where there was a 20-foot circle around the source of strontium-90 where there was no snow because of the heat generated. And to recover this small source that could fit in a gallon bucket took the effort of about 30 men, each working for only 1 minute to move the source closer and closer to a lead container on the back of a truck. And what that would be used for in the United States would be a similar application where it would probably use it as a battery, so to speak.
Now, what do you think practically can be done, given the fact that if there are thousands and thousands of pages from all of these different sites, and somebody or some people have to be assigned to go through everything to find out all these specific details. Is that economically feasible?
Probably not at this point. The NRC is already short with manning their staff level. They've decreased inspections at nuclear plants. There are literally several million radioactive sources in the United States. So just searching for those documents through the licensees that own these industrial sources or medical sources would take years to do. But there is something that could be done temporarily, and that is that every document that comes in from a licensee who is resubmitting for their application, that can be spot checked by some of the NRC staff to pull those pages, or at least pull the whole report so they have time to purge the page and put it back on the Internet. Because the public does have a right to know who has these materials and whether it's safe or not, but I don't think the public needs to know exactly what cabinet the material is stored in, complete with floor plans, and in some cases, security measures that are quite lacking, actually.
Where do you think the United States is today on this playing field of trying to increase our ability to fend off terrorist attacks?
I can mostly speak to the nuclear issue and to the Homeland Security's efforts to educate the public. And I'm very critical in the education process, because if I were Tom Ridge, if I were the Homeland Security czar, I would have a program once a month on television lasting an hour covering all the different topics until all of them are covered, and updating people on the things that they can do, because if you can educate people the responses they need to make and the preparations they need to make, then you have people who are not solely reliant upon emergency responders. You have people who will not panic as quickly as they would and would feel more of a sense of control, and therefore there will not be the need for martial law possibly if people aren't panicking and making runs and rioting to get some water at a store or things like this. I think that Homeland Security fell far short the day they announced that people should get the duct tape and plastic. The reason that duct tape and plastic is a good shield against radioactivity is it prevents the particulate matter from entering your home, because many of the radioactive sources from a dirty bomb won't harm you to a great deal unless you inhale them, ingest them, or enter an open wound. So if you can temporarily shield yourself with the plastic sheeting, you'll be in good shape. But see, Homeland Security failed to give the details of why this works, and to only do this in one room in your house. Don't enclose your whole house like one fellow did, and that's, of course, a hazard. They ended up causing the American public to this day think that plastic sheeting offers no protection against dirty bombs. It actually does not offer protection against gamma ray radiation, but that would be a special instance that certainly is possible. Homeland Security didn't educate us there. In fact, I was the person who was able to get the ready.gov site to change their advice to have people cover their mouth and nose with a damp cloth following any explosion, any building collapse, because you don't want to inhale what might be in the air. Mm-hmm. Oh, go ahead.
At the end of September, Reuters news service reported that police in the ex-Soviet state of Kyrgyzstan detained a man who tried to sell bomb-grade plutonium on the black market. Yeah. And that raises that question again. In the United States, how vulnerable do you think we are to a terrorist planting a dirty bomb or a suitcase nuke in Manhattan or L.A. or some city?
Well, we're incredibly vulnerable. I really see no difference between terrorists having an ability to gather those materials in the Soviet Union or anywhere else in the world and smuggle them into this country as compared to just stealing them in this country, because it happens every day. In fact, today the Nuclear Regulatory Commission reported the theft of 2 nuclear gauges, each containing small amounts of cesium and americium, but nonetheless could be harmful. About 10 days ago, the NRC reported that there were 5 thefts in California on a single day of these types of gauges. In fact, 4 of them were from one single theft, and in that case, for the first time ever, the event text published by the NRC said that this material could possibly have been stolen for use in a dirty bomb, but they believe not because of some of the other materials at this engineering firm site had been stolen, so they believe it was just for the monetary value. But nonetheless, that showed to me that even in what is cut and dry event reports, the NRC is putting some publicity. They're putting a little spin and trying to express they're aware that there's a concern here, and it's a real concern. Terrorists will have an easy time finding nuclear materials right here in this country, formulating a plan to collect them in large amounts or small amounts. Hopefully, if there's multiple steps, the terrorist plot can be foiled by arresting the terrorist and discovering where they accumulated a cache of materials. But in some instances, a single step of like a radiographic camera containing uranium-192 could contain 300 to 600 curies of deadly radiation that is ground up and dispersed in downtown Harrisburg, for example, would cause that area to be uninhabitable for several weeks, and the cleanup would be quite expensive. And this brings me to another issue. Last week we saw, for the first time, the government saying that there's going to be new standards following a dirty bomb, because there's a real question of, do you want to close down the port of New York or the port of Philadelphia if a dirty bomb were to explode there and shut down a major part of the economy of the United States if the level of radiation is only slightly harmful rather than deadly? And it's a valid question, because if the workers are exposed to, say, 10 rems in a year, which is beyond the limit the government wants you to receive, but hasn't been proven by all scientists, I should say, to be deadly or harmful is what I meant to say, then they just might allow these workers to be exposed to it. Now, especially with pregnant women, that's a problem. And even a man's semen can become defective. Mm-hmm. And so our government is not necessarily going to watch out for individuals, but rather their survival economically of the United States.
This is Whitley Strieber, It's Dreamland. We'll be back with Linda Moulton Howe in just a minute. This is Whitley Strieber, It's Dreamland. Linda, let's continue.
And what you're suggesting is that we're moving into a kind of new phase in which the government is looking at the majority, and that if a suitcase nuke or a dirty bomb went off, they are going to make decisions about how much of it can be cleaned up.
That's right, because economically, if they did a total cleanup, let's say a dirty bomb went off in a nasty one in 3 cities and dispersed by the wind, economically that could be equal to the national debt that we now have. And so there will be tremendous pressure and lobby to allow an acceptable level to some of the scientists, but not to all of the scientists. And they will just announce to the public that we believe these levels are safe, and there's no absolute proof that these levels are harmful. But the jury's really still out on what levels are harmful. And let's face it, not everyone's immune system is equal. And there's the problem. Our immune systems are actually pretty good at countering the effects of radiation on the cellular damage to our DNA and the gene and to cellular replication. Cancer, of course, is a result of damaged replication, and then cancers begin. Not everyone's immune system can counteract the effects of radiation. Some will do a tremendous job, and others with weakened immune systems will do terrible jobs. So dirty bombs can kill people, and I'm hearing a lot of things recently in the news saying, oh, there's going to be more people dead from the explosion than from the dirty bomb itself. Well, I have the manuals written by some very intelligent people on how to prepare for dirty bombs and nuclear plant emergencies. All this stuff has been written years ago. And in these manuals, they describe how some of these materials will be so radioactive that the victims need to be laid apart from one another on the ground, at least 30 feet away, so they don't irradiate each other.
And what you're saying, Scott, is that if the post-suitcase nuke or dirty bomb policies have to do with how much money it's going to take to deal with people and to deal with the environment, that you could end up with whole sections of cities in which the sidewalks and the buildings are radioactive and have simply been perhaps walled off as not usable, but that are still there in the environment. And the issue of what happens to people after such a huge and intense radioactive exposure may be that the government says, we're sorry, we can't help everyone.
Yeah, I'm saying even worse than that, is that in some instances, possibly, the radioactivity will be beyond what has been accepted as acceptable limits, and that the government will say, we can't afford to clean this up, so we will announce to the people that it is now safe, it's now cleaned up to the extent that we can assure you of good health, and that won't be the fact. And we have an example of this with the World Trade Center collapse, where the Bush administration, it seems like, gave orders not to announce that the asbestos levels and other chemicals
in the air,
was it chromium?
Yeah,
were in the air, and people were inhaling things that have ruined their health probably for life. And this was done to get Wall Street back open as soon as possible.
And I know firsthand for a fact from an attorney who would not want to be named, who was called within 1 month of 9/11, and he was asked to represent some people in the police force and fire force because they were all getting so sick and having so much trouble breathing. And I'm talking about 4 weeks within September 11th. And he said that he was told that it was top secret and classified and no one was to know.
Yeah. Well, this is a problem because the bottom line for the people running the United States is the continued survival and economic gain of the United States rather than the safety of every individual.
Scott, why do you think that we have not had a suitcase nuke or dirty bomb in the United States since September 11th?
One, I don't believe, and this could be naivety, that terrorists have suitcase nukes. I believe if terrorists had a suitcase nuke, they would detonate it within a week or two of having it. Why would they delay and wait when they have their dream weapon? As far as dirty bombs are concerned, there's been plots discovered and foiled, even in the United States, some planning stages, and I can't really give you a good answer as to why terrorists do things or why they don't do certain things. But I know that it's very simple here in the United States. And in fact, it'd be easier for terrorists to steal materials in the United States than try to smuggle them in, which is what many experts think is going to happen. I just don't see it happening that way. It's going to happen with our own materials.
Mm-hmm.
There was an example of this in Texas in 1996 where a truck had a false bottom hauling a ton of cobalt-60 and beryllium. And it was detected at the border crossing into Mexico and seized. The United States Army was called in, the FBI and other authorities. And I spoke with 3 of the men who were named in this report from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. All 3 of them told, and I called them within days. All 3 of them said, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, that clearly told me that national security had just been breached and that this, in fact, did happen because their names were in that report and nobody made up that report.
So that is a first-hand description that none of us would have believed, certainly was not highlighted in the media, about a ton of cobalt-60 and beryllium being found at the border, let alone that there have been blueprints and papers on the NRC website identifying where so much of this radioactive material could be found as part of the normal bureaucratic licensing process, which is one of the vulnerabilities of a nation that has been a democracy for a long time and where open description of materials related to our functioning as a nation should be available to the public, but now make us vulnerable in the face of people who want to kill all of us. And Scott also noted another potential danger that has not been described in the media very much, and that is extortion. In 1979, as one example of what has happened in the past and could happen again,
there was a man working in an enrichment plant in North Carolina, and he stole some low-enriched uranium. And he was able to do this by circumventing security, moving with a security shift change into the facility where he left doors open and stole several 5-gallon buckets of this material. And then he tried to extort money for the return of that material. At least he was caught. But today, if terrorists were able to locate plutonium and uranium that is weapon-grade material through the Internet and get, let's say, even 30 grams or 160 grams, they could send a sample of that material to the government and make blackmail demands. And how would the government know exactly how much they actually had? This is the world, unfortunately, that we are in, and it is dangerous, Whitley.
Linda, it is very dangerous, and it is a sobering report indeed. It just seems to me, listening to it, it is a question of time.
Unfortunately, I know.
Because inevitably, you know, this group in London that was found recently were discovered attempting to take americium out of smoke detectors. And they had dozens of smoke detectors. Each one contains a tiny, minute quantity of americium. But in a dirty bomb, if you took americium out of 500 or 1,000 smoke detectors, what would happen would be that it would set off radiation alerts and create incredible panic, while actually, in fact, not being that dangerous. But that's something that we wouldn't know until much later. So while it wouldn't actually cause much in the way of disease, it could cause a tremendous panic with a bomb that they could have basically bought from department stores.
And if they do, if the terrorists do get an amount that is equivalent to the one that was he heard about this week that had several thousand curies of radiation, that's what they want, and that explodes in the air, then you have the problem that any amount that is inhaled can set in motion the disease of cancer.
Of course.
One of the most valuable things that I think that Scott Portsline has been able to do is he keeps track of what Homeland Security puts on its website, and this man tries to help. That is his goal. And when he finally got one of these websites put on there, people need to at least get wet claws over their face. That is one of the more valuable steps that anybody could take, whether it is an asbestos or whether it's a materials blow up or if it has radioactivity in it. That is at least the start. And we all need to be so much more educated about what to do, not to be afraid, but so that we have education and hopefully won't panic so much if something does occur.
Well, Linda, thank you very much for a very sobering and frightening report. Right now from the UnknownCountry.com store. Don't miss next week. Zechariah Sitchin interviewed by William Henry. Tonight I'm going to be on Coast to Coast AM talking more about these animals with Art. That's going to be exciting. If you know what I wish you would do right now, I wish you would subscribe to UnknownCountry.com. We need you. And think of it, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a new live chat in the subscriber section, so you can actually chat with these wonderful guests on Dreamland and on the subscriber section on Mysterious Powers. And this week also on Mysterious Powers, stunner of a show. A man Todd Michaels has taken the beautiful miracle of the loaves and fishes, and he has found in it a secret message about what miracles are and what Christ was really doing that is awesomely beautiful. Just amazing. Listen to Mysterious Powers this week as Anne talks to this extraordinary man in his interpretation of this beautiful miracle. It is really, really something. What we're coming up with now, Barbara Hand Clow will be with us in just a minute, talking about the thing that we have been working on in the past few weeks on Dreamland, which is the process of contact, and she is after writing the Pleiadian Agenda, she's taken it a lot farther. And you know what? You know the enigmatic mystery of crop circles? They're so beautiful, but what are they? Barbara understands it. Yes, Barbara understands it, and you're going to understand it too when you listen to Barbara Hand Clow. This is Whitley Strieber. We'll be right back. Before we started with the program, Barbara said to me that she reminded me that we've had a kind of a parallel journey. But before I go into that, I just want to mention, and I'll mention this occasionally during the program, Barbara's website is handcloud2012.com. That's handcloud2012.com. And when you go there, be sure and click on the workshop schedule. She may be near you in the next.
And the negativity that's coming in is coming from pretty much from the Christian right. And over the years, I've had a very good relationship with them. And I don't mean what they say about me, because they don't like me at all. But what I've been able to do over the years is say, hey, wait a minute, I feel like I understand you. And they say, you feel like you understand me? And I say, yeah. You got interested in biblical history, and you got interested in Egypt, and you got interested in all these ancient stories about the world and about God. And meantime, you live in a culture where everything's boring and nobody talks about anything interesting.
Yeah.
And so you're interested in Christianity and Jewish history and all that stuff because it tells you something about your life, and it gives you a story that you can go on. And I just say to them, I respect that. And I expect to be respected for my story too, you know.
I want to just mention that one of the reasons I brought this up was that there is a way of getting past this split. There's always a squaring of the circle is always possible. Whenever it seems impossible is when it is possible.
Yeah.
And Anne has her own show now called Mysterious Powers, which is, and in the Mysterious Powers that's playing right now on Dreamland, on our website, she has an interview with a man a doctor called Todd Michael, who has written a book called The 12 Conditions of a Miracle, where he analyzes the story of the loaves and fishes and shows how it is actually a story of somebody who understood how to manipulate matter who was coming at it from a quantum physical viewpoint, and he proceeds to tell how to make your life a life in which you can make very real miracles also, and it's really about vibration. And isn't
that exciting, you know?
It's extremely exciting, and he's working, he's really has gotten a new key to the Gospels that fits the larger paradigm that we are all working on, and therefore squares that circle.
Yeah, isn't that one? The people our age, like in our 60s, it's rather unusual to be in touch with these levels. And it's just been fun having you on the planet, having the bravery to publish, this material as well as myself.
Well, right. And, of course, folks, you'd be surprised at how much bravery it actually takes. It's interesting, Barbara. The closer we get to 2012, the more I think of it as the wailing of the cicadas in the late summer. As they get close to the time of their passing, the more strident the voices become, saying no, no, no. I was interested that, when I started doing this back in the 80s, I rarely would get threatening email or threatening letters in those days. Then email came along, and the number of threats increased. But now, if we dare to mention anything that seems to go against President Bush or fundamentalist Christianity, we get death threats.
Well, you should come to one of my workshops in the sense that my workshops, we've been totally open all the way through this period. And we actually and we've been teaching this particular material for 8 years now, and that's Jerry and me together. And we actually had a lot more difficulty with people getting angry 7 or 8 years ago than we do now.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah,
because
at the same time, what I was going to say is our population right now is split almost 50-50 between Christian fundamentalists or evangelicals and then basically new consciousness seekers. You can call it New Age if you want to. Right. But it is amazing in this country how we are just split right down the middle. And that's why it's so difficult right now, because one side seems to be in a battle with the other side. And yet, in fact, we both have relatively similar points of view. It's kind of like if you get a Baptist and maybe say Unitarian, not a Unitarian, but more like an Episcopal theologian together, they'll fight harder than if you get a Jewish theologian and a Catholic theologian. In other words, the closer we get to being in the same fields of interest, often the more that people will fight. Yeah. And so I think that anger, that rising anger.
Few months, and if you want some of this energy and you do need it, go there and go to that workshop. That would be very, very valuable for all of us. I hope I can be at one of them if I'm close to where she is. Now, Barbara, let's go back. Before the show, as I was just saying, you started by saying to me that there was this parallel experience, and could you amplify that a little bit?
Yeah, and hi, Whitley. Good to talk to you.
Hi, good to talk to you.
I like all of your books, but one of the ones that I like the most is called The Secret School.
Yeah.
Is that right? Because I don't have a copy of it right now. I went running around for it, but I thought that was right. And because that's where you told your story of getting in touch with other dimensions, and maybe extraterrestrials, maybe not, but that's where you really got in touch with some of the record banks that you're in touch with. And basically, you and I seem to be in touch with the same data banks. The other person who seems to be in touch with these data banks also is Barbara Marciniak. And she's been a close friend of mine for years, so that when we get information at the same time, we get to check with each other, And there definitely is a download of the mastery schools coming to this planet at this time. It's an amazingly exciting time to be alive, probably the most exciting time probably since the time of Pythagoras in 500 BC and then earlier. And it's just amazing to be alive now and to share in this experience of all this knowledge coming back. And basically all I want to do, and I think you're in the same place, is just get people excited about this stuff, because once they get interested, then they become excited and curious, and their lives take on a new shine and a new joy and happiness. And that's why we come to the planet. That's what we should be doing here,
Well, exactly. We are in a situation on this planet that not only it's something that we must be doing this.
Yes.
And I want to now. Do you want to continue to discuss my material, or would you like to go on and start talking about yours, which I am?
We can go on with mine if you want to, but I just wanted to point out that there are people, not a lot of people yet. Although when you get down with younger people, like people under 30, it's like they look at me as if they can't even believe that I don't understand that all of them have already figured all of this out, which is also kind of exciting.
There is a lot of new stuff going on this week on this website. Do not miss the Lufkin animal story. The Elmendorf beast, you will recall, a few weeks ago, we published pictures of it. We have it under DNA testing in California. DNA tests are not yet completed. We still do not know what these animals are, but another one has been found in Lufkin, Texas, and we do know there is yet another on the loose in Lufkin, Texas. We have detailed pictures on the website. Go to unknowncountry.com. Go to Dreamland. You'll find in the part about the subscriber section a click-through to detailed pictures. You do not need to be a subscriber to see the pictures, but to listen to the interview with Stacy Womack, who actually examined this animal, a 20 years of experience in the veterinary area. It took a personal examination of this animal, and it is really a remarkable story. It is beginning to look as if as if somebody has created a genetic monster out there playing with genetic experimentation and released it into the wild. These animals are suffering. Their mouths do not work right. They cannot eat properly. They are severely malnourished. It is extremely strange, and even stranger is you'll hear Stacy Womack talking about when they shoot these animals, and this was true in Elmendorf and it's true in Lufkin, they do not bleed. They simply die. The animal in Lufkin, it's bizarre, extremely bizarre. The animal in Lufkin's skin just crumbled away as if it had been dead for weeks, even though it had been killed within an hour of her examining it. We are trying to get people to trap these animals instead of kill them, but, it's hard to communicate across so many different areas, and people tend to shoot first and think later, sadly enough, but hopefully that won't continue. Next week, by the way, on Dreamland, Zechariah Sitchin will be interviewed by William Henry. This is a rare occasion. Zechariah does not do many interviews anymore. He's got a new book out. You can get it